Yo guys, what's up? It's time again. Blizzard has released another PTR patch notes. This time, the PTR patch notes number 3 for Warcraft 3. This comes out on May 17th, 2024, and as per their words, they're aiming for early June as their target date for this patch to go live. At this time, they're limiting further changes to only numerical value changes, or, if necessary, full reverts. So I'm going to be showing you guys the new changes that they've come up with for today's PTR patch. Then we're going to be going over the master changelog, all the changes that they proposed in PTR version 1, 2 and 3 have been consolidated, and anything that had started here and was then buffed in version 1 and then nerfed in version 2 and then finally brought over here in version 3, well, the master changelog will only show the final result. So how does this affect the game Warcraft 3 at high level, and try to make a conjecture how it's going to affect Warcraft 3 at the intermediate level, which is very tough for me to imagine, obviously, though I will say that I'm getting closer to the intermediate level every day, and I hope eventually in 10-20 years I can truly call myself an intermediate Warcraft 3 player despite being a former world champion. But anyways, that is going to be what we're going to be looking at, and I'll be making some comments on all the changes that we're going to be seeing. There might be one more slew of changes as per their words, because, you know, the final version patch is the final version that they're going to be uploading for now for the game. And these are the PTRs. They're testable on the PTR, which means if you want to try these out, well, all you got to do is to go here, open your launcher, and then you take this, and instead of your game version Warcraft 3 for Reforged, you click here and you say PTR. You have to install that as a separate client, and then you hit play. So everyone can test this out. I've tested some things out. I also want to point out that I really appreciate, on the one hand, well, I don't appreciate what happened with Reforged, some of the bad press we got, some of the bad changes and everything, but what I do appreciate is that either 22 years after the game came out, or if you count it as Reforged, at 4 years after the game came out, we're still getting balanced patch changes. I think it's a good thing. It keeps it fresh, and I appreciate the way that they've gone about it. So let's jump into it. So the added modified changes. So searing arrows, they've reverted it. No, you know what? I'm just going to go over the master changelogs. I think that's a bigger deal, because there are some changes in version 3, but let's focus on the master log. It's much clearer, and then we can go back to the changes that happened specifically today later if we feel like it. So to begin with, master changelog for human. Polymorph can now target heroes. This is an extremely non-meta happenstance that pretty much doesn't happen. People do not go for master sorceresses almost ever. And when I say people, I mean anyone at high level that plays over 5,000 MMR on Battle.net or over 1,500 MMR at Warcraft 3, which is pretty much just if you're above average, and not even very high level. People do not go polymorph in general. So understand that in order for this to matter, what is going to have to happen is that people innovate upon what is currently being done. There would have to be some creation of a strategy that would start to involve polymorph that is not currently being done, and that I currently do not see as being viable to be implemented. Because while this is very strong, you're giving something else up. This is called opportunity cost, and you could be giving up either being able to take an expansion, being able to fend for yourself, not perish to an enemy's attack, contest for important creep camps, and so on and so forth. So polymorph, big buff to something deeply non-meta. We talked about this a lot before. I think it's cool to check it out. Blizzard does about 1 patch per half year currently, if they keep up the current cadence. So maybe they'll cycle back after half a year and we'll all be crying for a reversal here. I doubt it. And I think by the time polymorph comes out, this spell exists, so it's fine. Arcane Tower is extremely meta, so this will be a nerf that will be felt. It goes to a value of 14. A couple of years ago it was 12, it was buffed to 16. I feel like that was ham-fisted, a little heavy-handed. So, so far I agree with both changes. Knights and Sundering Blades no longer require Lumber Mill to build. This pretty much does not matter at any level of play. When you go to tier 3, that's usually with an expansion as a human player. even if it is without, pretty much you need lumber mill anyway in order to have optimal lumber economy to afford everything. Human as a race needs a lot of upgrades, those cost lumber, and so you've got a lumber mill generally. So this really doesn't matter much. Sundering Blades now requires an upgrade. That's a nerf. It used to be default completed upon reaching tier 3 and unlocking knights. You just had it. They all came out with it. So this is a nerf. This is targeting mostly human versus undead. As of late, human has had more advantage against undead than they had for the past quite a few years. Human undead was quite challenging, and it feels more balanced now, perhaps even a little overbalanced. In my opinion, and this is extremely subjective, and we're just looking at the extremely high level of human undead. There's not a lot of high level undead players, but we've got a couple. You've got Labyrinth, Happy, and 120. Happy is significantly better than 120 and Labyrinth, and Happy can lose to the best human player, which is Fortitude. In my opinion, Happy's skill looks a little higher to me, but I also think Fortitude is extremely good. Yeah. Overall, this is targeted at human undead. I do think this is justified based on my instinct about it. It still exists. This is like an attack upgrade that is costed in between level 1 and 2 attack upgrades. So essentially, Knights against medium armor now have 4 attack upgrades instead of 3. And the cost is of level 1.5, and the value is of a level 1 upgrade. So that is, as a first upgrade, it is, in my opinion, not as valuable as Iron Forged Swords, but before getting the second sword upgrade, Sundering Blades will do more. And the fact that it still exists, I think it's good. The fact that it's an upgrade and not default, I also think it's a good change. So far, I like all of these, and I think it's good. Flame Strike was one of my suggestions that also came from Save Orcas, which we had discussed together. We actually had the same idea about Flame Strike, that it takes quite long to cast and is quite cancelable. It's not a super meta ability, but we do see it from time to time. Giving it a little quality of life and a buff improvement, I think is merited. It's fun, and I think it's good. The control magic change, I feel like, is somewhat a misappropriation of my fantasy patch note. So in my fantasy patch note, which was, I call fantasy for content, but was really a wish list and a suggestion for Blizzard, I went pretty in depth about control magic, and my goal for it was to keep it the same strength against everything, but weaker against heal ward. That's it. Just same strength against everything and weaker against heal ward, both at the behest of 1-on-1 balance and 4-on-4 balance. Keeping in mind that healing ward is extremely non-meta, and I was just trying to enable healing ward in one matchup, and control magic being such a no-brainer counter against it, and it wouldn't even make a big difference. It still would be strong against it, but they only took half of it. So I said raise the mana cost baseline for control magic from 25 to go up, and lower the percentage of mana for summoned unit from 45% of their health to 35% of their health. So by raising control magic to cost 45 mana, but then lowering the percentage from 0.45 to something lower, it would pretty much be even against almost anything, but much worse against an extremely low health point unit like heal ward. But they only took the part where it gave a smaller cost for the percentage of health, but they didn't take the part of a higher mana cost baseline, and I don't think that this achieves much, and it should really use both or just leave it alone, in my opinion. So this 45% to 35% is fine, but then you have to give 20 higher mana cost to the baseline of control magic. And I showed the maths on it in my balance patch note suggestion, and this is a little verbose in this video, in this format, but I have a video on it on my YouTube channel at Grubby Talks. As you can see, I said, hey, 25 mana used to be, now 45 mana, right? But then you go from 45% to 40%, and the result is that it will cost 20 more mana to take a healing ward. And that was pretty much the main goal, and it left it the same in every other case. But now it just receives a large buff, and I don't think this is the right way to go about Control Magic. Okay, next, Rifleman HP plus 10 HP. This is going to be a relatively large buff for low and intermediate level human players who love playing Pala Rifle in every matchup except Human Mirror. 10 HP for such a staple unit is quite a big deal, and it makes Pala Rifle quite a lot better. This is one of the favorite strats for humans and can be quite hard to stop for intermediate level undead players, orc players, and perhaps even night elf players. And so it might be a bit too strong at low and intermediate level, whereas at high level play, there have only been few human players ever that could challenge top level undeads with Pala Rifle, Thorzane being one of the ones, and we don't see it actually all that much or at all at high level. So I do not expect Rifleman with 10 bonus HP to become a problem at top level human versus undead play. The top level human players right now are probably in the West, Starbuck, Hawkblade. Am I missing anyone? And then in Asia, it's Sok, Fortitude. Rifle against Undead currently do not see a lot of play. Right? And then, so I don't expect it to be a big problem there. Riflemen see... Leon. Sure, Leon. Riflemen do see more play against Orc. Either Rifle Priest Sork play or Rifle Priest Breaker. We see some Pala Rifle against Orc. Again, not at the very high level, but at the sub-top level. And then we also see some rifles mixed in against Night Elf. Usually not Archmage Mountain King Rifle anymore. We see some Archmage Blood Mage Rifle against Warden with like an early timing push. And we see some rifles mixed in after a human fast expansion and then mixed in with their Sanctum and Workshop units. So in all of those situations, this will be a relatively significant buff, but ultimately it is how much percent? It's not a lot, right? But the 10 health, it will be a bit of a nice change. And together with some meta buffs, I do think it's justified. Human also gets some meta nerfs. I do think it's justified Human also gets some meta buffs to things that are used a little bit less. Which also includes the Dragonhawk Rider base damage. I think 2 is too much, I think 1 is right. It feels slightly risky to give 2 bonus damage. Dragonhawk Riders are relatively meta. We see some Human Fast Expo Dragonhawk use against Gargoyles. In Human against Undead. Undead goes Gargs. Human may do Dragonhawk after opening with Mountain King Fast Expansion. We see Dragonhawk Riders against Orc from time to time. Recently been seeing some more Aviary base play against Orc. We don't see a lot of Dragonhawk Riders in Human Mirror, but even if they were strong, it's Mirror, so whatever, right? And Dragonhawk Riders against Night Elf are a niche surprise unit sometimes, a niche rush unit. And this is actually potentially going to be quite a big problem against Night Elf if the creative implementation of them actually becomes successful. But it would require strategical work, because right now it is absolutely not meta against Night Elf. Overall, we don't see a lot of Dragonhawk Riders there at all. And they're not super meta in general, but they're always on the cusp of being used in a variety of different matchups. This feels like a lot. That's 12%, 11.7 bonus damage, to be exact, 11.7%. +1, I think, is justified. +2 feels risky, especially considering they don't take huge nerfs in general. And Human is not weak right now. But overall, I don't think this is a bad list. Overall, I don't think there's anything egregious, and I've said what I said. Now let's go to the next. So for Orc, Troll Headhunters have gone from 4 years ago to be extremely meta and even a problem unit being used in every matchup, to now having a relatively healthy position. In Orc versus Night Elf, you pretty much don't see early Headhunter strats, and in fact you don't see much Headhunters at all at any point in the game. But they are valid to mix in some in certain situations. 1 damage is significant, but it's not a huge deal, in particular because they also can get it back at tier 3 once again. And this also fixes any problem that might have in 4-on-4 FFA or in late game Orc versus X matchup, like Orc versus Undead. The fact that they get it back at Berserker is going to prevent this from being a problem. It is a meta unit in general, especially Orc versus Human. You will see either Grunt into 4 Headhunter, or you will see 6 Headhunters or 4 Headhunters opening against Human. They don't get used against Human every time. Sometimes it's triple Grunt opening, 1 Grunt opening, but it can be 1 Grunt, 4 Headhunter, or 1 Grunt, 6 Headhunter. There's all kinds of openings that there are against Human. 1 damage isn't going to move the needle that much, but it is a nerf, right, to the meta. Healing Ward is deeply non-meta in one-on-one, and a needed buff to try and make it a little bit more viable. The investment to go there is an opportunity cost problem. Healing Ward, like Polymorph, buffing it by 50 mana and giving Polymorph hero targeting are both extremely powerful. This comes out way earlier than before, but because it is so deeply non-meta, and because the opportunity cost of going for these master training upgrades removes so much of your power in the early to mid game, I'm not even sure we'll see it at all. But if we do, this may help make it more viable. But just like Polymorph and Rifle strats and Dragonhawk strats, it's going to require creative work from the main proponents of that race, from the main players of that race, in order to implement it into successful strategies. These are research projects for players of that race, and I think that's interesting. That keeps the game interesting. So, nice. Torrents. Didn't take my slow resistance suggestion, but created something easier to implement and along the similar lines, plus 20 movement speed. Now, my balance patch suggestion video actually had a 20 movement speed buff to Demolishers, and I got to feel just how strong that is on Demolishers in that patch. And now I can really feel so strongly the difference of 20 movement speed, right? I think 10 also on any unit is a lot. So I do think movement speed is a very powerful thing. Now, torrents are currently completely non-meta in any matchup, right? We don't see torrents in any matchup for Orc one-on-one, and everyone agrees that they're bad, they're weak, they get kited. So their kiteability was needed to be addressed, and they are so uncommon. They are back to the tier 3, no longer tier 2. And my suggestion was slow resistance, which means they can't get slowed as much. Many other people said they should have a charge ability, where they can momentarily get a burst of speed, which I think is too strong. Some people said that they should have resistant skin, like Mountain Giant or Spirit Walker, which I also think is too strong. That's why I came with the slow resistance. This is very strong. I would feel like 10 is probably safer, but considering torrents still get countered by many of the same things, including magic damage and kiting and air and magic air, I'm not sure they're going to be too strong, torrents. But I think this is an exciting change that will require research and development by orcs in order to make successful torrent strategies implemented into the meta. And if an orc does that without this spell, then well, maybe you'll see some polymorph as well, right? Serpent base ward damage going down by 2 at level 3 was also one of my suggestions that they are thinking of implementing. And I think it's fair. Serpent ward level 3 are extremely powerful, and if it gets to that point, Orc generally beats Night Elf once you get to Serpent ward level 3. If they're still relying on tier 1, like either Huntress, Dryads, Talents, you can have up to 6 at the same time. It doesn't kill the Serpent ward, right? It's still very strong. Windrider XP. So normally XP for units is tied to their level. If a unit is level 4, then it has the level 4 equivalent of XP attribution when you kill them. Level 1 is a peasant and it is 25 XP. Level 2 is a footman and it is 40 XP. They also happen to be 1 and 2 population. A rifleman is 3 population, is therefore XP level 3, and that is 60 experience. A Griffin and a Wind Rider are both 4 population, so they are level 4 XP, which is 85 experience. Then it becomes 105 at level 5, and I believe it's 150 at level 7. And I'm not sure we have 6 population units, but that's probably going to be then 135 or something, or 130. I'm not sure, because I'm not sure we have any 6 population units. But those are the XP values. So this would make Wyverns, I should say, Wind Riders, I should say, from 85 to 60 experience. This is a rather large buff. There is no in-between value for Blizzard. The way that XP works, they typically do not play with XP values in between the discrete levels. So in my opinion, the ideal value would probably be 80 or 75, but not 60, but also not 85. Wind Riders are not used in Orc Mirror. They do not get used against human or against Night Elf. You pretty much lose if you make them in those matchups. And against Undead, they also haven't been that good. But the recent current meta, stimulated by players like Focus and Lyn, has been almost 100% Wind Rider play against Undead, right? So one important thing to look at is if Wind Riders are good against Undead, and if this is going to like tip them over the edge against Undead. And Wind Riders have always been called Tomes of Flying Experience because they have 575 health and they have 0 armor, I think. Yeah, 0 armor, 575 health, and they have light armor, and they are 4 pop and 265 gold and 60 lumber, but then they give 85 experience. It's the easiest 85 experience to get in the entire game, and their fragility usually didn't get compensated with the amount of damage output that they have, which is pretty good damage output. And they come out to tier 2 as a 4 pop air unit. So overall, had we not seen the recent Lyn versus Happy games, I would say this is 100% justified. But I know some people are gonna wonder, wait, Lyn just beat Happy 2-1, aren't Wyverns OP? And I would like to let you know about the recency bias, right? Before Lyn beat Happy 2-1 in the series, he had lost series after series after series after series after series after series against Happy, including many times with Wind Riders. He had been trying. He just won his first series of several series with Wind Riders, right? And before that, he had done many different builds, including Raider Walker, double Rax Headhunters, 1 Rax Headhunters. He had done so many different builds, and now he's won his first series with Wind Riders. So we are still in the process of seeing how Happy is going to be responding. Is he going to keep playing Gargoyles? Will he just make slight improvements? Is he going to switch to Fiends? We don't really know yet. And this is they're the ones that are pushing the envelope of play right now on Orc versus Undead. It literally doesn't affect anyone else in one-on-one, at least right now. This may or may not make a difference, right? I think I see this as an extremely non-meta unit is getting a much deserved buff. I think this is correct. And then we can monitor. Demolisher movement speed, same thing, extremely non-meta unit that pretty much doesn't see play, gets a buff. Now, 20 is quite a bit, but I don't think the demos are uncounterable, and you can adjust your play if you're facing demos. I don't see anyone... I think it's extremely unlikely that with the demo buff, the Glaive Thrower movement buff, and the Meat Wagon movement speed buff, that we are going to be looking back at this months later and be like, oh my god, everybody's playing Demolishers. This is way too good. Everyone's playing Meat Wagons. I just don't know how to dodge their projectiles. They're just so fast and I keep losing to Meat Wagons. That's what I think. I could in particular be wrong on Meat Wagons if Necro Wagon takes off against Human or something. But for demo, Glaive Thrower, I'm pretty confident this is a safe buff and a needed buff. Right? So overall, how do I feel about Orc? They lose 2 meta things in Serpent Ward damage and Headhunter damage. Then they gain relatively big buffs in very non-meta things, which is Healing Ward, Torrent, Demolisher, and Wind Rider. With Wind Rider being on the cusp of being meta or not meta because of the way that they've just now started to get picked up in Orc versus Undead, which was pushed by Lyn. So this is probably the riskiest change that you could look back and say what were we thinking? Or like, was that a mistake? And then for one-on-one specifically, this one could also end up being quite strong. But I doubt it. But we'll see. So if you just kept playing the same way as before, Human is nerfed, Orc is nerfed. But if you're willing to research and develop and make some new configurations of flow in your play, these could end up being buffs for the races. So I think that's interesting because, again, it stimulates innovation in a well-seasoned game. Overall, not bad. Pretty good, I think. Pretty good, the changes so far, right? But my points of critique stand where I mentioned them. I'm not wiping that out, just kind of summarizing and then going on. Why do you call Serpent Ward meta and Wyverns non-meta? Because they are. So next up, Night Elf. Searing Arrow damage changed to 12, 24, 40. From 10, 24, 40 to 12, 24. Okay, so to be clear, this is the master changelog. Searing Arrow actually is 10, 20, 30, right? In the current live version of the game. And so it's going to be 12, 24, 48. Do I think this is a good change? I think it is a good change. 48, wait, but is it going to be 40? Yeah, this is the one it's going to be, right? We can look at the patch log. Searing Arrows, okay. So it's going to be 12, 24, 48. I think this does feel like a lot, but that is a level 7 priestess most likely, without Orb of Venom, right? Because a level 5 priestess right now is 0, 2, 3, with 3 being True Shot, and 2 being Scout Owl. No, 2 being Searing Arrows. So she's 0, 2, 3, or 2, 0, 3. So either 2 points in Searing or 2 points in Scout Owl at level 5, which means she enjoys a 4 damage buff at level 5, which is not a big problem, right? But nice buff for a less used hero. At level 6, she picks up Starfall, and at level 7, that's where she might go for Searing Arrow level 3, where she would be enjoying a whopping 18 damage buff. But generally, Night Elf likes to put Orbs of Venom, which do like, I don't know, 60, 70 damage in poison damage on a target. And probably something like 13 damage per hit, because it's 5 baseline, and then there's maybe it's 7 damage per second. So even though she keeps reapplying and lengthening the duration, which means not every hit carries 60 damage or so, basically when you have an Orb of Venom, you're adding 13 damage per hit. Like 7 plus 5, 12 damage per hit. So for Searing to be chosen over Orb of Venom, it would do more damage. But if you switch targets and Orb of Venom target a lot of different targets, then you're actually adding 60 damage per hit or so, which is more than 48. And it doesn't cost mana. And then you get to have Scout Owl instead as well. So overall, I don't think Searing is going to be a problem. And this is my lengthy explanation for why I do think this is a cool change. And may even open up Priestess first against Orc or Human or Undead. I know that's probably crazy talk. 2 damage at level 1 ain't that big of a deal. And the Searing Arrow still cast 8 mana. They removed the 5 mana buff. So it's still 8. And that might be crazy talk, but there may be a little research and development from the Night Elf players to check out if Priestess first might be viable. However, the expectation is that Priestess will only be played in Night Elf Mirror as a first hero and against Orc as a third. That is the current meta, and therefore we can say that this will only affect Night Elf Mirror. So more Priestess in Night Elf Mirror. Do we think that's a good or a bad thing? If I was a Night Elf, I think I would think it's a bad thing. I think Demon Mirror is more skill based. However, Demon versus Priestess, Priestess versus Keeper, Keeper versus Demon, and Priestess versus Priestess, there is a lot more strategy when every hero is kind of possible. Overall, I don't have super strong opinion on that, but it mostly affects Night Elf Mirror. I would like to hear from more Night Elf players. But I think it's fine, this. Starfall gets buffed, more damage per wave over a shorter duration. Considering the main counter is cancelling it, having more burst on a shorter duration is a buff. Starfall buff is a good thing. Nice. Because it has counterplay, it's fine, but you want to make sure it's impactful. And it wasn't quite impactful enough, and now it will be more. It's going to be quite devastating now if you don't cancel it. Tranquility gets a 20-second buff, which means you can use it every 100 seconds instead of every 2 minutes. I think my first gut instinct was that it's a mistake because Tranquility is so strong. However, Keeper of the Grove's power spike is level 1, 2, and 3. And Keeper generally is weaker at level 4 and 5 because he gets countered by this time via Dispel. Keeper kind of tends to dominate with map control at level 1, 2, 3. But then at 4 or 5, when people have Dispel, such as Purge, Disenchant, Destroyer, Devour, Priest Dispel, Wisp Detonate is always there, of course. You know, that kind of thing. Then Keeper drops off a lot at level 4 and 5. And so for him to have a strong level 6 is quite nice for him, right? That he has a bit of a power spike there. Firelord also has a power spike at level 1, 2, and 3. But does not get a fantastic ult. So Keeper, you know, is in a better situation there. And I must also say that with the removal of Ultra Vision at tier 1, Keeper hasn't been as dominant as he was before. Ultra Vision now is only researchable once you're tier 2, and I think that has been a major needed, but definitely an extremely big impactful change that has made Night Elves feel like they have a lot less map control, because they used to have double the vision of opponents during night, and that allowed Keeper to always hit where it hurts most. So Keeper's level 1, 2, 3 has already been affected. Then they had less Moonwell juice a little bit, and then giving the ult like a bit shorter cooldown, I think is okay. Night Elf probably needs some help in some matchup, and maybe this is it. Force of Nature, -5 mana. I would say I don't agree with it, especially in tandem with the mana regen from the Moonwell, but I also think that 5 mana is a very small deal in general. I don't think he needs it. I do disagree with it. Vorpal Blade Research. Vorpal is extremely non-meta and may still never see play, so this is 100% a justified buff, right? So far, to summarize, Tranquility is a meta thing and it gets buffed. Force of Nature is meta, it gets a tiny buff. Vorpal, very non-meta, gets a buff. Moonwell is very meta to make Moonwells and it gets a buff. Wellspring is very meta and it gets a small nerf. Fan of Knives, we'll talk a bit about it, but it's mostly a buff. Fan of Knives. Wisp, massive buff, we'll talk about that soon. Nature's Blessing is meta, Wisp is meta, gets a buff. Warden is meta against human and it gets mostly a buff. And then Glaive Thrower also gets a buff, but it's extremely non-meta. Overall, Night Elf is the biggest winner of the patch. And so the main question is, do they need to be, do they need it, let's say. Right now, Night Elf against Orc, I think, is in a pretty good spot. Night Elf against Undead struggles a bit. And Night Elf against Human, I'm actually not sure where it is at. But I feel like maybe they also struggle a little bit. This is quite a few buffs. I think this is the one that I disagree the most on so far. Because they're all buffs to extremely meta things. Almost all. And what would have been cool is to see some buffs to things that are less meta, such as Chimera, Hippogriff Riders, maybe Druids of the Talon in some form, but not in the problematic form, but just in the okay form, right? Mountain Giant, rework, perhaps, Glaive Thrower, right? Fairy Dragon, perhaps in some way, though that's also risky. Overall, Night Elf tends to be the race that spams one unit to great effectiveness in various situations. So a buff to any unit can be really risky because of the way that, I don't know, strategy just evolves from how they are. But let's talk about them one by one a little bit more. So Moonwell regeneration going up will affect every matchup, and I think it is a big deal. Moonwells are this interesting resource that, on the one hand, they're really effortless. Massive amounts of mana and health healing that don't even cost any money, and together with Staff of Preservation, Moonwells can be very powerful at giving the Night Elf map control and healing. Other races maybe pay for their healing, and Night Elf doesn't need to. So this kind of buff just makes Elf stronger in every single way, in every single matchup. And that doesn't feel fantastic to me, unless it is combined with other races also getting buffed on average, and or with other nerfs to other things or something. Like if this tends to be a good change. So I wonder, where is this targeting? Maybe this is targeting Night Elves getting rushed by Undead and by Human. And I can kind of see that this can be a problem for them. Getting swamped by footmen, ghouls, skeletons, water elementals can put quite a burden on the Night Elf and their healthy economy and defense ability. So let's say if this happens, then what else happens, right? In a standard situation of Elf against Human, we're gonna have to break this down a bit one by one. So Night Elf fights Human, and they can either start with Keeper, Demon, or Warden. Each have their own strengths and weaknesses. Warden can be really tough to survive against like an Archmage, Blood Mage, Rush. Demon Hunter is just solid, but also doesn't offer a lot of like unit pick-off potential compared to like a Keeper. And the Keeper does have unit pick-off potential, but can really drop off once the Human gets a fortified expansion location with towers, and eventually unlocks Priests as well, if that's what they're going for. So each one has strengths and weaknesses, right? So how does Night Elf with Keeper change against Human? We're going to compare everything, for instance. Force of Nature is a little cheaper, and if they can get to Tranquility, it's better. They have more Moonwell regen. Wisp HP. Again, I need to dedicate a chapter to that, but we're just going to touch upon it without in-depth discussing it. Keeper, Night Elf against Human, gets 10 Wisp HP, Moonwell regen, Force of Nature mana cost reduction, Tranquility, Nature's Blessing lumber cost reduction. Those 5 together, that's 5 buffs to the Keeper meta against Human without any downsides. Then you look at Human. What does Human get against Night Elf? They lose Arcane Tower hero feedback burn. They don't really do much Flame Strike against Keeper. They don't get much Knights against Keeper or Polymorph. Not a lot of control magic. They do use Riflemen somewhat, perhaps. And maybe you could do Dragonhawk Riders because they can't get entangled. So Human probably requires innovation, if that's possible, to try and go for Dragonhawk Riders against Keeper. But for the most part, this seems to be a summary of like 7 buffs for Night Elf against Human. So I think that's risky. Yeah, I don't know exactly where. Like, does Keeper Night Elf need 7 buffs against Human? I'm not sure about it. I think it's too much. And now let's talk a bit about Wisp, and then we'll talk more about other Night Elf versus Human. Wisp HP increase from 120 to 130. So first, Orc Peons are 250. Human Peasants are 220. And Acolytes, I think, are 230 right now. Acolytes are 230. So you've got 220, 230, 250, Wisp 120. On the face of it, you're like, oh my god, Wisp has so much less HP. But on the other hand, that's how it has always been, right? And the balance has always been pretty good with that. So it's not like you can equate things one-to-one. They're also cheaper with 60 gold. They can also deny experience when they detonate. They're the only unit that can dispel at tier 1. They can hide on trees that cannot be attacked across many places in the map. They can gather lumber anywhere after scouting. There's so many advantages. They're faster than a peon. There's so many advantages they have. You cannot just look one-to-one and compare to others. So the next question is, okay, how does this change the Wisp plus 10 HP? Well, the Tauren Shockwave, the Tauren Chieftain Shockwave at level 2 does 130. So it used to kill Wisps, and it still does. Not a lot changed there, specifically when talking about Shockwave. War Stomp didn't used to kill them, still won't. 10 HP does mean 1 or 2, like 1 extra hit or half an extra hit for most units, most average damage you can have in the game. So Wisp have 1 more hit of HP from anything. So a Blade Master in the current meta needs extreme luck to kill a Wisp in 4 hits. Like a level 1 Blade Master does not kill a Wisp in 4 Wisps, except like once in 100 or once in 50 or once in 20 times, based on experience. Like, he has a large damage range, but it is not stochastic. It's not linear distribution of the damage. It's usually in the center, which is a bell curve. The damage spread in Warcraft 3 is a bell curve because of multiple dice rolls. And so Blade goes from 4 hits to and maybe sometimes 4 hits, but generally 5. And then he's going to go to always 5 or maybe sometimes 6. I don't know. Right? Mounted King with 110 damage Thunderclap does not currently kill wisps and still will not. He will leave them at 20 instead of 10. And that is definitely one difference in hit by a footman, a rifle, though a hero probably will still kill in a single hit. So any human basic unit will need 2 hits instead of 1 after clap level 2. Carrion Swarm. This is the big one actually. Carrion Swarm does 125 damage. And the Wisp used to have 120 life, so you could level 2 Carrion Swarm and wipe out a Wisp line if they were lazy enough to put all the Wisps in the same place. And that won't be possible anymore. They'll all be 5 HP. And I think that is not a good thing. If, and this is a completely disembodied feedback, I'm not giving a value judgment yet on whether I think Wisp HP should be buffed or not. But if they are going to be buffed, it should at most be to 5, +5. So that Carrion Swarm still one-shots them. You could of course say, Carrion Swarm is a problem. Level 2 Carrion Swarm is too good against Wisps. Dreadlord Openers or Dreadlord Second against Night Elf are a problem. But they are not. Right? We don't see Dreadlord against Night Elf at all until maybe level 3 Dreadlord in a Gargoyle versus Hippogriff standoff. And it's usually not a third hero Dreadlord that gets to level 3 that threatens Wisp. That is the largest problem in the matchup in general. So that I think it should not be pushed to 130 because at the casual level, let's say, you can still see Swarm Wisps. Then, next up, Death Coil. Currently, Death Coil does 100 damage against enemies. And that means that, for the most part, 1 coil and 1 skeleton hit, or 1 coil and 1 ghoul hit, can kill a wisp. And this is going to be a big difference, where wisp will survive 1 physical hit from the skeleton and the ghoul, guaranteed. And might even survive an auto attack from the Death Knight, along with a coil, which has never been the case before. And so the question is that a good thing? Is that something that Night Elf needs? So the base damage for Death Knight is 25 to 35. And if the Wisp is going to have 20 health after, he dies, the Death Knight. But with 30 health, it is actually 50-50 whether he will survive against the Death Knight. And that is a huge change and a buff for Night Elf. Maybe that favors... maybe that's a good change for Night Elf Undead, because Wisps are a big target for Undead to harass. But I don't think in general this is a good change. Wisps are very powerful, and I don't think, I don't think it should happen, especially in tandem with everything else. Nature's Blessing Lumber Cast reduced by 50. Nature's Blessing is a very powerful ability. And lumber is a big resource for Night Elf when going for Ancient of Lore, which they do in most matchups. So it is a relatively big buff. I also don't think that Blessing is poorly priced, or that... I don't even think having buildings have 7 fortified armor is healthy in general. Most buildings in the game have 5 armor, some have less. And the only way to get more than 5 is via Human Masonry, level 3, Imbued Masonry, which is kind of a toxic upgrade. It gives a total of 30% bonus HP and 3 extra armor, leading humans to have 8 fortified armor. I don't think that's a healthy or a good situation in general. And Nature's Blessing gives Ancients 7 HP, and I think that's a lot as well. Of course, this also counts for Treants, which means it's another buff for Keeper meta against human. And I think it is well priced. I don't think it has ever been badly priced. People get this all the time, and it affects every matchup. So I don't think it should happen. Glaive Thrower movement speed I think is a great change. It's very non-meta Glaive. It also buffs Night Elf Mirror Priestess style together with these 3 changes. And Moonwell buff, these 3 all make Priestess Mirror better. And then the Glaive Thrower also makes Priestess better. They tend to use Huntress, Archer, Glaive Thrower because that's all they can make if they stay on tier 1. Right? And those help against Ancient Protectors, Moonwells, and Dryads, which might be used to counter Huntresses. So more Priestess Mirror might happen, which I think it's fine if that creates more different strategies. It would not be fine if it becomes the only strategy. Overall, I think a lot said. Let's do a little bit more analysis. What about Demon against Human? How does Demon Hunter against Human change? Well, none of these matter for that. Buff via the Moonwells, nerf via tier 3 Moonwell, but overall I think still a buff. Fan of Knives doesn't affect Demon. Wisp is a buff, Nature's is a buff, and Glaive Thrower doesn't matter. So Demon receives, especially via Moonwell and Wisp, pretty good buffs against Human. How does Human get buffed against Demon? Well, they lose the arcane feedback mana burn. Rifleman can be used against Demon. Right? Will maybe be used. Dragon Hawk not super common or meta or popular against Human, against Night Elf. So overall, I would say Night Elf improves a little bit in that area as well. And I say a little because it's a small amount of changes, but actually some of the biggest patch changes are this Wisp and this Moonwell. And I think it could be a problem. I just don't think this Wisp HP thing should be done for any matchup. Because it's too global. It's better to target problem matchups via changes that only affect that matchup. Such as if you recognize Night Elf only use Hippo Rider against Undead and they need help against Undead, buff the Hippo Rider, right? Change their 30-second mount dismount cooldown and make a 10-second mount dismount so that they can have a bit more flexibility there. The Fan of Knives change is going to have a consistent target count. 6 units can be targeted at level 1, 2, and 3. I think that's a good change because the tooltip doesn't say anything about the amount of targets it actually has. So it's extremely untransparent. It's like, oh, it does 5, then 6 and 7. Or does it say something about it? But either way, I don't think it's a good thing to have different targets. It's going to be 666. 666 for Fok, Fan of Knives. Max damage goes up at level 1 and it goes slightly up by level 2 and then it goes down quite a bit by level 3. So better at level 1 and worse at level 3, right? Interchangeable at level 2. And then Fan of Knives damage, this is max damage, this is the actual damage per target, and the reason this exists is because Carrion Swarm and Shockwave, maybe not Shockwave, Carrion Swarm and Fan of Knives have a kind of hidden damage cap, unlike Shockwave or Thunderclap. Blizzard and Flamestrike, I think, also have damage caps. Basically, if more units are within their damage range, then they don't end up doing full damage to all of the units. There's a kind of strange mitigation process. I don't know the exact numbers, but there's some kind of mitigation process. That's why this exists. Fan of Knives goes from 75 at level 1 to 70, which is actually a nerf. Minus 5, and then at level 2 it's it's plus 5, and then at level 3 it's plus 10. So they hit one more target for 5 damage less, but the damage cap is up a bit. Pretty difficult to parse the changes or to understand the effect it's meant to achieve, so I don't have much of an opinion on it. Let's go to Undead. Undead gets a 5-second buff on the Haunted Goldmine build time. Basically what this means is that they will have the goldmine 5 seconds faster, if not harassed, which means they get 10 gold per second if fully mining, 5 seconds faster. You get 10 gold per second on a fully mining goldmine, which means this is a 50 gold advantage. It also makes it 5 seconds less likely to be cancelled by an opponent that tries to cancel the goldmine. Currently, Undead has had the best expansion situation that they've ever had in the history of Warcraft 3. Back from 2004 to 2019, Undead pretty much couldn't expand almost ever, but especially couldn't fast expand at tier 1. That has been a lot more common, and strategically that has made Undead Human more interesting. In the past, Human would expand, Undead would all in with DK Lich Pitlord, and then Human would go workshops and Undead would either die or they would kill the expansion. It was very binary and boring, and it has been a lot more interesting with both races expanding and then fighting with a variety of different strategies, which has included gargoyles, ghouls, destroyers, and necro wagons, and Human has gone both air, ground, as well as workshop style. So there's more strategical variation, which I think is a good thing. Does Goldmine need the buff? I'm not sure. We don't see a lot of Undead expansion against Orc anymore. That strategy was pretty much buried with the removal of Cryptlord double beetle summoning. When Cryptlord was very strong in 2020, we saw a lot of Goldmine expanding by Undead at tier 1. Pretty OP, but it is really not meta anymore against Orc. This might make it more meta. Might. Right? It is a significant buff to something very core. Now, Undead against Human. This will help Undead against Human quite a bit. How is Human against Undead? Right? Because we have to look at every matchup. Polymorph barely matters. Arcane is nerfed against Undead. Sundering is nerfed against Undead. Rifleman might help, and Dragonhawk might help. So okay, we have remembered that. So Goldmine is a buff against Human, obviously. Normal or piercing Nerubian. Mostly, this depends on how you attack the Undead base. Piercing is better against air. Normal is better against ranged. So rifles, they die more to normal. Piercing helps against Dragonhawk Griffin. But Dragonhawks often bring Cloud when you have Dragonhawk Griffin style. So it doesn't really matter what they have, it's going to get clouded anyway, which means that their attack gets shut down. But piercing, better against casters, worse against heroes. It's worse against rifles. Overall, I do think this was a good change. It's pretty long to talk about every aspect, so let's move on. Ghoul Frenzy research time, plus 5 seconds. The previous consideration was going to 60. And that is quite a big change, a 15-second timing delay. Big changes can be risky. Many people felt it was justified, but I prefer the more measured approach of something in between as well. Plus 5 is not a big change. This one though, Ghoul Frenzy movement speed, bonus movement speed, down from plus 80 to plus 50. So the Ghoul's movement speed right now is 270, which you can see if I move this here. The Ghoul's movement speed is 270 right now, and then they become 350. So what else is 270? The Tauren. What is the Tauren? Tauren is very slow. So Ghouls and Taurens are both slow. Taurens are becoming 290 with the patch. And Ghouls used to become 350. So let's look at some other units. Where is the Huntress? I believe Huntress is 350. So the Ghoul became as fast as the Huntress and would now only be 320. So what else is 320? Let's take a look at Warden without boots of speed. Warden without boots of speed is 320. So the Ghoul goes from Huntress movement speed with Ghoul Frenzy to Warden movement speed. Now keep in mind, Ghoul with no Frenzy are not valid as a fighting unit in the anywhere beyond like tier 1. Undeads don't fight a lot with tier 2 ghouls. It happens a bit, but they're not a problem, let's put it that way, because they're slow. They gain a significant buff from the 35% attack speed that they get from Ghoul Frenzy, and the 80 movement speed. 80 is a lot, right? But they kind of need it as well to be good. Now, ghouls have been overrunning Night Elves in particular a bit with their timings, and Orc, which is actually why Orcs have stopped building Headhunter builds in the current meta, though it can change again. They've stopped doing Blade Grunts and Farseer Headhunter because the Ghoul Frenzy timing was so strong that Orcs are now pretty much just cheesing every game and going Wind Riders against Undead, right? So perhaps a nerf is justified, but I think minus 30 is way too much. Minus 30 is going to make Ghoul, I think, quite bad. I think it's too much. I would suggest going from 80 to 70. I know that may not be what some people want to hear about, you know, getting Ghouls nerfed or whatever, but I think there's two things to keep in mind. First of all, the 20 movement speed buff on Demolishers and Meatwagons and Glaive, try it out for yourself. It is actually really impactful. 10, 20 movement speed is a lot. Even 10 nerf will be well felt, right? At 50 bonus movement speed, they can't even catch and surround heroes anymore, which is kind of their uniqueness, Ghouls. At this much movement speed, which will be 270 plus 50 is 320, Ghouls are just like extremely fragile grunts or extremely fragile bears or something, right? Like they're slow and they're also very low on HP. Unholy Aura and Endurance Aura were nerfed 4 years ago. They don't do 10, 20, 30 movement speed anymore. They do 7, 14, 21%, right? So they had already been nerfed on that as well. Everything is. Every movement speed was. I think this is too much. I think 70 would actually put them in a pretty good spot, personally. The second thing to keep in mind, and I think we don't see this enough, if we're judging things on Happy, I think he is currently in his form the best Warcraft 3 player I've ever seen. And of course he doesn't have as many accolades way back when, you know, when Warcraft 3 had the biggest bustling esports scene, and somehow that matters as well. And you cannot like compare someone that played 20 years ago to someone that plays actively now. But I think he's very good, and targeting nerfs just to target him, in particular him, because I don't think 120 and Labyrinth are as big of a problem for the rank 2 and the rank 3 player of the other races, right? Is Labyrinth a huge problem for Sock? Then okay, maybe you can talk more, but mostly it's Happy. Mostly it's Happy, in my opinion anyway. So I think we shouldn't overreact just to punish Happy. He won so much in the last 4 years, so nerfing him seems to make sense, but I don't think it's deserved if it's just one guy, right? Next, Curse duration. I think justified. Banshees are quite good. I actually priced them at tier B, but maybe, and I do think actually tier B is correct, but because they don't see, they're not like OP in every matchup, like you always take them or you rush them or something. But Curse is really quite strong and probably lasts too long, so I think this is fine. Cripple targeting mechanicals, I like this because necromancers are still extremely non-meta. We don't see them pretty much at all, and this could give Undead an alternative way to counter, in particular, flying machines and siege engines. But flying machines are really cheap to cast such an expensive spell, so it's mostly about siege engines. And we do see some siege engines of Human against Undead, and we usually don't see them countered by Necros, but by Mud Golem, Ghouls, and Meatwagons. And so I think Necros could be a pretty cool way to maybe deal with them, and Necros happen to be quite strong against Human Mountain King first in general. So I think it can really become a strategy, but it requires research and development. For Scroll of Healing removal, I've commented on this before, not having it be in the Tomb of Relics, Tomb of Relics. I think it's a great change. It forces undeads to compete for invulnerability and heal scroll at the neutral Goblin shop, just like anybody else. Wand of Negation added to the Tomb of Relics. 2 charges, 150 gold, 5-second cooldown, available at tier 2, hidden behind the Temple of the Damned, unlocked behind the temple. I think this is a fantastic change. I super agree on this. Was kind of my idea as well, and I think the reasoning for it is very sound, because if Undead still wants to go get their Dispel from Destroyer at 9.5 minutes, they go Slaughterhouse, they go tier 3. If Undead wants to go Slaughterhouse, Rush, and tier 3, and Destroyer and Orb of Corruption, they cannot get Temple, which means they cannot get Wand of Negation, which means it doesn't end up becoming OP, right? Because Wand of Negation early is particularly strong to remove Slow, Hex, and Tangle. And Feral Spirits, Water Elemental, Rod of Skeletons, So it's best against those. And if you give it at tier 2, that's way too strong. It just invalidates Keeper, it invalidates Shadow Hunter, it invalidates Water Elemental to a degree, right? And Feral Spirits. But hiding it behind Temple, kind of genius, because now Undead would have to go either Slaughter and Temple and tier 3, which is costly, and then buy Wand of Negation. Or they go tier 3 with Temple instead of Slaughterhouse, which means they have no access to either Destroyers or Obsidian statues, which is huge. Those are pivotal in the current meta. And then they can go Banshee or Necro instead, which means they're either playing Unholy Frenzy Pitlord or Unholy Frenzy Lich, or they're playing Curse-based or Anti-Magic Shell-based style. And then you get Wand of Negation, so you have your Dispel. And this can be as early as 6 minutes if you rush with 3 ghouls to tier 2, or 6 minute 30 if you do like a 6 ghoul or 5 ghoul opening with no graveyard. And so Dispel can come down from 9 minute 30 to 6 minute 30, but then you have to give up early tier 3, or you have to give up map control if you go tier 3 and Temple and Slaughter. So they have to make choices, and I think this will be an interesting choice for Undead, which is a buff to couple some of the nerfs they have, including Scroll of Healing, Curse, Ghoul Frenzy, and Frost Nova. So Meatwagon plus 20 I think is a good idea. The movement speed plus 20. Maybe Meatwagon should only be plus 10 because Necrowagon might be OP, but I doubt it. Necrowagon does have potential against Orc, Human, and Night Elf. It's worst against other Undeads because of Destroyers, but it's actually quite good against Human, Elf, and Orc. I feel like it's always been around the corner of viability, but isn't viable because of the pacing. The pacing and the opportunity cost. But what I'm trying to say is, if you get it, it is quite tough to counter, but you can't get it in the current meta because of the timing and the opportunity cost. Make it good enough, and it's going to be worth it to go to it. So it's interesting. Let's put a pin in this and see. But so far, at the moment, this is a buff, a significant buff, like the demo and the Glaive Thrower, to something deeply non-meta. But less deeply non-meta than Glaive and demo. We do see some Necro Wagons sometimes. And I say sometimes, against like Mountain King opening when they fast expand. You can do it. Frost Nova slow duration goes down 0 seconds at level 1, 1 second at level 2, and 2 seconds at level 3 against units. I think this is deserved. This is an extremely potent ability with a huge slow on units. It's very strong. It will still be strong, but I do think it's deserved. Cryptlord Impale mana cost. Cryptlord currently does not get played pretty much at all. He used to be played as a first. That's mostly dead now. And he used to be played as a third, and that is also dead now. People prefer Pitlord, Dark Ranger, or Dreadlord as a third. So buffing him, why not, right? Death and Decay buff, again, why not? It's fine. It's very non-meta. Gets a small buff, it's fine. Web, this is a pretty big one, and if it wasn't for this, I might even worry about Wyvern buff, because Wyvern, to the best of my knowledge and our communal understanding, will only be played against Undead. So will this make it too strong against Undead? Well, in conjunction with the web buff of 50-50 resources, we may see a shift away from Gargoyle Destroyer into web. And considering you can also do Temple and then get Curse, which is quite good against Wyverns, and then get Wand of Negation against Hex, which is quite good against Farseer, Feral Spirits, Shadow, Hex. I think Gargoyle Destroyer, like if you don't go for Garg Destroyer, but you go for Fiend and you stay on tier 2, right? You go for Fiend and Necromancer, or you go for Fiend and Banshee. I think that is so good against Farseer, Shadow, Wyverns. Might kill Wyverns again. It might make them non-viable. But that requires research and development from both the Orc and from the Undead, so I cannot give a definitive answer on it. But I think this change together with the Wyvern change are good changes. It is a nerf to Hippo Riders against Undead. That is true. It is a nerf for Hippo Riders against Undead. That is true. And for Fairy Dragons. As for Undead against Human, Also impactful. The web upgrade is also a buff for human air. It's a buff for undead against human air. So it could be a contentious change, but I just have to honestly admit I'm not sure about this one, how it's going to be, but I think it is positive for Orc Undead because Wyverns got another buff. If Wyverns did not get that buff, then this would be further killing them to be completely non-viable in any matchup. But together, I think it's interesting. Though, I don't know how it'll work too much in the other matchups. And then finally, Abomination plus 2 damage. Abominations, we see either 1 or none, which is a pity because they're so pretty. That's nice. Maybe we'll see more than 1 Abomination. They're still worse than Taurens, straight up, right? If Abominations fight Taurens. Abomination against Knight, still mostly worse than Knights, right? People don't make more than 1. They get 1 for tanking or they get 1 for Disease Cloud and that's it. I don't remember the last time I saw more than 1 Abomination in either FFA or 4-on-4 or 1-on-1. So giving them a damage increase I think is fine. Could be interesting. Boneyard. Boneyard 25 gold cheaper. Freezing Breath 50 lumber cheaper I think are extremely justified. Worms by now are extremely non-meta, deeply non-meta. And giving that buffs is fine and nice for variety. Frost Breath, I suggest that they get the +1 second on hero slow after upgrading Freezing Breath. Looks like Blizzard went with a straight up buff against heroes. Keep in mind this used to be 10 seconds on heroes and 10 seconds on units. Now it's 10 seconds on units, 3 seconds on heroes. Taking it from 3 to 4 puts it much closer to how it is now than how it used to be. And how it used to be is that we saw some Frost Worms against Night Elf and Orc, but not a lot. Maybe against Night Elf the most. It was like DK Lich Gargoyle into Frost Worm against Demon, Naga, Bear, Dryad. And we're still much closer to 3 than to 10, so I don't think it's going to be a problem. But if it is, hell, it'll be a new problem at least. New compared to the last 3-4 years where worms do not see play at all. So I think this is a good change. So what is my summary on Undead? Big buff. I doubt it's justified on the gold mine. Nerubian good. Frenzy, I think this is good. I think the movement speed nerf is a little overdone, should be 70. These I think are all really good. All of this. Web will have to wait and see, and I think these are all good. Now overall, does this nerf or buff Undead? Undead mostly is getting nerfed on meta and buffed on non-meta. So overall it might be a nerf if you make no changes for the most part. If you make no changes in your play as an Undead player, but a buff to Goldmine. Overall, I do think Undead is getting pretty good changes. It's relatively well balanced. Night Elf is the biggest winner in the current version of the patch notes. Not going to repeat everything I said before. Orc is the biggest winner if the new research and development works for Demolisher's Healing Word Tauren. But it's non-meta stuff. Gonna have to wait and see whether these non-meta changes will make any difference at all. It's also possible you see barely any change in Orc. Either the buffs or the nerfs do not really have a lot of change. So they might look exactly the same. You might see some experimentation with Taurens, Healing Word, Wind Riders or Demolishers, but there might be not much change. Orc is probably the least affected. Human gets some meta nerfs and some non-meta buffs and then some meta buffs. So overall I'd say it really depends. It's not easy to say who is the biggest loser, though Night Elf is the biggest winner in this current version. Would I say that Night Elf is the best race right now? I don't think so. I think the best race right now is either human or undead. And so with that in mind, I think we could have many universes where we saw worse patch notes. So overall, I'm pretty positive about it. And everything else that I said before stands. Okay, so let's go to the next changes. Neutral changes. Firelord Volcano building damage factor down from ×3 damage to ×2 against buildings. Fine. right? Soulburn buffs, I previously talked about this. I think it's fine. Tornado buff is fine. Mana shield, fine. This is a new one. Goblin Zeppelin food cast increase from 0 to 1. I have two opinions on this. One, Zeppelins are fun to play with. They're pretty fun to play against. They're fun to spectate for viewers. Right? And this makes them slightly worse, which means we'll see less of them, which is a negative for all the reasons that I just mentioned. That's the first part. The second part, what I'm saying, is Zeppelin's value. Zeppelins are 240 gold, 60 lumber, higher every 30 seconds on cooldown at laboratory, and offer up to 8 slots to carry units, to suddenly give global transportational power to units that didn't have that before. That is an extremely powerful mechanic. The price of Zeppelins is pretty good for what they give you, and they're 0 pop, which means you could have 2 or 3 and they don't cost any pop. In meme strategies, such as what I do sometimes in funny challenges on YouTube, I could go like 20 Zeppelins for fun when I'm smurfing or something. That will no longer be possible, which again is a pity. But focusing purely on the strength, what you get out of it, one population is a fair price point for what Zeppelins represent in power. They're one of the best units in the game. We should all be making more of them in every game we play for the most part. You can save units with it. You can get to places that otherwise you couldn't get to. Zeppelins do see play in every matchup by every race. And so purely based on that, the price point of 1 pop is justified for what they give you. But my only question is, why? Because we can all make Zeppelins. And we all make Zeppelins. And they're fun. So my judgment is, this shouldn't happen. And my secondary judgment is, it's a fair change. But I don't think it's a fun change. I hope that makes sense. 1 food with no XP, never happened, right? Oh, you're wrong. Zeppelins do give XP. They always have. They give level 1 XP, 25. Even though there's 0 pop. Which means that is also a precedent for discrepancy of population count versus internal XP level. Wyverns 4 gonna be level 3 XP. Zeppelins are 0 pop, give level 1 worth of XP. But yeah, I think this is nerf for no fun reason. Next, items. Reincarnation delay from 7 to 5 is fine. Gloves of haste attack speed increased from 15 to 20. Didn't we see 17.5? Maybe that was the non-master log. So, 15 to 20. I think this is fine. Circlet of nobility cost increased 175 to 250. Circlets were always the strongest permanent drop of their level. They have now been upgraded in level to a higher tier. That is probably balanced because they were the best, but I also don't think it's fun. I love imbalance in items. I love it to get lucky, and I hate it to get unlucky, but I love to hate it. So I think the Ring of Protection meta has been more boring than it's either Circlet, Ring, Gloves, or Claws. I liked Claw +6, Circlet, Gloves, Ring +2. It was really imbalanced, but it was kind of exciting. It's more mellow now. It is now Ring +3, or Gloves +20 apparently, and Claws +5, and then Ring of Superiority +1, +1, +1. And Circlet is now a higher tier, +2, +2, +2, which shares space with something like Talisman of Evasion, I believe, which is a strange equation. Strange that they're equal to it at the level 3 drop table. And yeah, I mean, it should probably cost more for what it does. You can purchase one for 175, and many people do. I've seen Happy buy it on DK, only to give it later to Lich. I've seen Arc Mages buy it. Leon just bought one against me. Blade Masters have obviously always been buying this, and Blade kind of needs it. Demon Hunters buy this very frequently. I've seen Keepers and Demons buy this against Orc. So it is so valuable that many people think it's like an afterthought. So a price increase does make sense per value of the item. But because everyone can buy it, you wonder, why? Porque everyone can buy it. Now, purely by how common it is, maybe it should be more of a choice rather than a no-brainer to get it. And for that reason, I do think a price increase can be merited. But I think 250 is too much. It's too prohibitive. I think it should be 200. Don't change it too much. I don't think it's worth 250. I think it can be worth a bit more, but don't underestimate. 200 at most. My suggestion, 200 gold. Next up, creeps. I'm going to be glossing over these more because I don't really care too much about what creeps do. I've looked at these before and I mostly agreed with them, but I'm not really going to have detailed feedback on whether the pulverize from Sea Giant should be this much. That actually, I do have an opinion on this. I think this is a good change. Yeah, it was a bit too much. But again, you know, I'm not going to draw the line here and say that's a problem, this is good. Like, this is all fine. And then that's kind of it. So overall, I think, first of all, appreciative of change. I think it's going to stimulate research and development. I don't agree with everything, but if I were to choose no change or these changes, I would vote for these changes. So overall, I am in favor of these changes. And if you wanted to see one more time, for the purpose of the YouTube video and your own reading, the changes that happened in the most recent PTR, I'm scrolling through them so that you can see them. I'm also going to be linking these in my YouTube video as well so that you can get the written version and leave your own angry feedback alongside with all of these guys here. But maybe some people like it, some people don't. You can go leave your own comments there. Overall, I've given my thoughts. It's the PTR 3 patch notes for Warcraft 3. Very exciting stuff, and I look forward to playing with it. And I look forward to seeing what the final version is going to have at the beginning of June 2024. Thank you, Blizzard, and thank you guys for watching this video and for subbing to the channel if you like this kind of content and want to see more. Cheers. See you next time. Bye. Awkward ending now.